Okay, so this is the second, it's the shortest of 3 videos related to utilitarianism, which is really a consequential ethic that is discussed in chapter 3 of our open text. So in the previous video, we introduced the concept of utilitarianism and the different nuances of it, and then we all finished with looking at altruism, and which is similar to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, remember, is an ethic that says ultimately what we want to do is create the greatest happiness or the greatest pleasure or the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. And under utilitarianism, you kind of believe that consequences is all that matters, that what we're trying to do is maximize one's happiness or pleasure, and that no one's happiness or pleasure is more important than anyone else's, so that everyone's happiness is equal, right? And so the question is well, so since both of these are, and altruism, by the way, is an ethic that says, well, I'm just concerned about others. I'm not concerned about myself. So when I try and consider how to bring about the greatest amount of happiness, I consider others. I consider all the other different parties. What I don't consider is myself. And so both of these are basically based on the concept that happiness is what really matters. Well, the question is happiness all that really matters? I mean, this concept of hedonism, where you're trying to just bring about the notion of happiness, may not be the only thing that matters. So, for example, in his book Elements of Moral Philosophy, James Rachels says, imagine this. Imagine that there's a very accomplished pianist, and she loves playing the piano. She uses her talents to make beautiful music, but then she has a tragic accident that leaves her hands mangled and not able to function like they did before the accident. Well, someone might say that, oh, well, you know what, just deal with it and just kind of move forward and seek happiness in other ways. Well, she might become happy. She might be able to do that. But that doesn't change the nature of the accident, meaning it still doesn't change the fact that she can no longer make beautiful music the way that she once could, right? So, therefore, you can't really take this accident and make it something good by just making her happy. It doesn't change the fact that she can no longer actually play the piano. She can no longer have fulfillment through that activity because her hands just can't perform the way she used to. The accident would still be tragic. And I would also say that perhaps maybe there's other examples where happiness isn't all that matters. So, for example, if you think about different things that make us happy, like friendship or art or experiences, right? We love those things perhaps just for their own sake. We love friends just because of having friends is good, whether or not those friends always make us happy or not. Sometimes our friends don't always make us happy, but that doesn't mean having a friend is not a good thing. Sometimes art you may or may not find pleasure in art, or maybe you may not find the same pleasure in the same work of art all the time, but that doesn't detract from the value of the art itself. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of contemporary art, but there's much value in contemporary art, regardless of whether it brings me joy or not. In experiences, right, that we have in life, sometimes just the experience itself is valuable, whether we enjoy that experience or not. So sometimes I don't know if happiness really is all that matters. And so therefore hedonism may not have it all right. And so it may not be all that it's cracked up to be. So then that leaves us with another question. Are consequences all that matters? So let's take this as an example, as a hypothetical example. Something that's somewhat similar to what Rachels brings up in his book, Elements of Moral Philosophies, again. So imagine that a utilitarian was visiting the city, where there was a history of racial strife in that city. And then during that visit, a Hispanic man rapes a white woman. And that race riots occur as a result of the crime. The white mobs take over the city with the help of the police, and they begin bashing and killing Hispanics as a means of retribution against this alleged crime. And suppose further that the utilitarian is in the area of the crime when it was committed. such that his testimony could possibly bring about a conviction. Well, that utilitarian may just point to a particular Hispanic, whether he did it or not, and say, that guy did it. And the reason that utilitarian would do it is because he or she is worried about the consequences. In other words, hey, you know what? I can restore peace to this city if I can just point to a guy and say he did it, regardless of whether he did it or not. And so this person would then probably most likely be tried, go to jail, all because the town needed to be need to have peace restored to it. But does that really bring about justice? The actual person who committed the crime may walk free, while the person who was falsely accused goes to jail, all to bring about happiness for a great number of people. I don't think that's a very just system, right? Or maybe think about this. So maybe where the person who's violated isn't really actually hurt. So imagine that you check into a hotel room, right? And you check into your hotel room, and what you don't realize is that in your room, that the owner of the hotel has placed hidden cameras so that he can see what you do in your room. He sees you in a state of undress. He may see you do other things in your hotel room, and then he posts those videos online. Now, there's probably a great number of, quite honestly, perverted people out there that will gain a lot of pleasure from watching those videos. You're not harmed because you may not ever know about that. You may not ever come to your realization that your stuff is on the web, right? So you're not hurt, and then a lot of people gain a lot of pleasure. And so maybe a utilitarian would say, hey, you know what? This action is justified, right? Because it brings a lot of people happiness in whatever demented way. So they would say, well, it's the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. However, that doesn't account for my personal rights. I have a right to that privacy. When I checked into that hotel room, I did not give the owner permission to videotape me and then place those videotapes on the internet, right? So I have a right to my personal privacy. Utilitarianism would say, no, all that matters is really just the consequences of the actions, and if this brings about a lot of happiness for a lot of people, then yeah, sure, he can do that. He's morally justified in doing that. I think that's a problem. And so ultimately what happens is these consequential ethics have some limitations to it. It doesn't account for justice. It doesn't account for personal rights. And it doesn't account for the fact that, you know what, some actions are valuable in and of themselves, whether or not they bring about happiness or unhappiness. So there are some definite limitations to the idea of consequential ethics. In the very last one, we're going to look at another consequential ethic that is not utilitarianism, but instead is a different ethic called ethical egoism. That will be in the third video.